doing that kind of stepping in the shoes of in supervision better equips practitioners to be in the room with multiple people, to remain curious about what's happening for them at any given moment within a conversation, within a session, within a space, and hopefully have a model experience by which to draw on where they can foster that and invite that same curiosity with the families that they work.
Welcome to the Emerging Minds podcast.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Moss. Welcome to episode 2 of this 2-part Emerging Mind podcast on supervision for children's wellbeing. Recently, Emerging Minds worked closely with a group of supervisors from the Bouverie Centre in Melbourne to develop an online practice course for supervisors and organisations who are interested in child-aware and child-focused supervision. This course can be found on the Emerging Minds website on www.emergingminds.com.au, and the course is called Supervision for Children's Wellbeing. So a little bit about the Bouverie Centre. They are an integrated practice research organisation that has been bringing family therapy to Australia to promote healthy relationships in families, organisations and communities since 1956. As part of their practice, Bouverie Centre professionals are interested in supervision processes that bring the voice of the child into the room during case discussions, but also that engage families, including parents and caregivers, in respectful and generative ways. In episode 2 of this podcast, our guest from Bouverie Centre will discuss the role of the supervisor in working with practitioners who work specifically in child and family services. Our friends from Bouverie will describe their own experiences in supporting engaging practice that supports all members of the family and that increases the reflective skill and self-awareness of the practitioner in helping children and families to overcome challenge in their lives. Throughout this podcast, you will be hearing from Hanna Jewell, who is a social worker and a family therapist and has led the Bouverie Centre's partnership with Emerging Minds to create both the online course and the podcast that you'll be listening to today. Banu Maloney has been a therapist and lecturer at the Bouverie Centre for over 16 years. Banu has a long history in supervision and has created processes and strategies that help all practitioners to keep the child in focus in all engagement settings. Julia Oxley is a mental health occupational therapist and family therapist who has vast experience across both adult and family-focused services. Angie Nyland is a social worker and trainer at the Bouverie Centre. Nicholas Barrington is a psychiatric nurse and family therapist who has worked at the Bouverie Centre since 2019. In Module 2 of the online course that Emerging Minds and Bouverie Centre have created, you will be introduced to Felicity. Felicity is a practitioner that has become frustrated by a mother in her work with both the mother and the child. As part of this, Hanna describes her supervision strategies in helping practitioners to notice if they are becoming frustrated or even overwhelmed in their work, and the effects that this might have on their clients, or even some of the questions that this frustration might disqualify.
This is like one of those moments in supervision where someone is describing someone and then all of a sudden there's a sort of change in their disposition or their kind of emotional intensity around how they're describing it. And maybe they say things in a more blameful way that isn't part of how they would normally talk. And you pick up the change, I guess, in how they're kind of describing or telling you about the family. And so I think they're the kind of moments as a clinical supervisor you might pick and like, Felicity, I've just kind of noticed you're talking in a very different way than what you normally would about this parent. I'm just wondering, are we able to kind of explore that for a moment? I'm just really curious about what might be happening for you. And I think it's kind of that sense of that feedback too, because maybe she's not noticing that she's doing that. And that could be part of your question. Have you noticed that? I just want to point this out. Have you noticed that? What's happening for you? Help me understand. It's sounding like you've got, you're feeling, feeling something different towards this client than how you would normally, and kind of knowing your work and how empathic you are with people. I'm just, this seems a bit out of the picture or doesn't kind of fit. And I'm just wondering what, for me, doesn't kind of make sense. Are you okay with that? Checking in, are you okay with if we kind of just chat a little bit about that? And will you let me know if it doesn't feel comfortable? And I'm, just really curious to hear what might be happening for you at this point in time and whether there's something we can do today that might be helpful around that kind of feeling, and whether in some ways it gets in the way of the work or not. I think it'd be really interesting to kind of think about, what it is. But help me understand what's happening for you at this point in time.
We know that work with children and families can be challenging for all practitioners, no matter how skilled or experienced. That feeling of immediacy for change for the benefit of the child can become very strong and might even have us working at a pace which is too fast for the child or family. Julie described how she works with practitioners in her own supervisory practice to help them consider the context of the family with whom they work and slow down their practice so that they can really understand the context of each individual family member.
Clinicians have a strong sense of their client, or practitioners have a strong sense of their client, and they really often align strongly with their client and they want the best for them. So it's honouring that in a clinician that gives a lovely opportunity to be able to privilege the parenting role in a client. And to be able to do that allows us to then think about what our own anxieties or worries are about inquiring about parenting, and to be able to think about it in a way and to use the existing skills that a practitioner can have to even just start to inquire, to make sense of, to get a sense of what their concerns, if there are any concerns, but just to be able to paint a picture. If a clinician comes in with an assumption that there's going to be concerns about their parenting, that's going to be fairly obvious to the client. And that's the last thing a parent wants to hear, is that someone assumes that you've got concerns or that you're not always doing it right. And so I think that notion of kind of curiosity, of just asking, just showing some interest, showing genuine interest, will usually speak to the client. Because more than likely, the most important people in their life are their children. And if we can connect with that, then it gives a bit of an opening. So it doesn't mean that the practitioner has to have some really quick, kind of clever parenting advice, but even just understanding who their children are. What do they do? What are their favourite things? What do you like doing with your child? Even starting with some of those really ice-breaking conversations, getting out a genogram, understanding who's important in their lives, just starts to open those doors.
Hanna described the importance of supervision that allows practitioners to reflect on the pace of their practice, help them to maintain a calm and curious position with families, and help some of the questions that may not have been previously asked to really come to the fore.
Get involved in this work because you want to make a difference. That you kind of do this work because you want to see change for people, and you have lots of hopes for people as well. You kind of hold those and you really want things to be different for people. And sometimes this causes a bit of a mismatch because you're so eager to kind of create change and you've got some great ideas that might be really helpful, but actually you can get out of line with the pace of where the family's at or where the person's at. And that actually getting out of pace isn't helpful. If you're achieving too fast and they're not getting there, you might be thinking, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not catching up with kind of where the goal is. We want them to be here. Rather than a sense of, if you're pacing it with them, you can see how things are working. Like, it is a bit one step at a time. Change is difficult and sometimes it's slow. And if you go too fast, you leave people behind. So how you kind of rein in sometimes your own eagerness to align with where things are up to with the person that you're seeing. And I think in clinical supervision, I often find this in the role is actually getting people to reflect on where their goals are and where their clients' goals are, and how you might keep pace with that, and how you might work so that you are working together, not you kind of going or jumping too far forward from it.
For all practitioners, there are times when we get stuck in our own work with children and families. In supportive supervision, practitioners receive the space to talk through these times of feeling stuck without fear of judgement or consequences. Banu describes how she achieves this balance in her own supervision practice and how she allows practitioners the confidence to reflect on their own work.
Sometimes people get stuck in working with someone because they just don't have enough experience, or they don't know what else they could be doing because they just haven't had enough years of experience or enough knowledge about different frameworks that might help them to ask the questions. Sometimes people get stuck because the issues that they're working with a client is so close to their own issues. The struggles that the client is having is so close to the struggles they are having in their own life or might have had in their life. It stops them from being able to be objective, but they may not be aware of it at the time. What they may be aware of is feeling irritable, feeling impatient with the person. As a supervisor, what I do in order to create the safety at the beginning is declare that when somebody is struggling, then I have two ways of exploring what that struggle is. One might be, what else can I suggest that you do? What better questions could you ask? What better ideas can you come up with? But I also think sometimes it's useful to look at, is there something that the client is struggling with that is resonating for you, mirroring for you, or ringing bells for you in some way? Now, if I ask that question, it might mean that you might feel vulnerable in talking about, I've had a similar difficulty with my partner, or I've had a similar difficulty with my mother. Is that something that I would have permission to explore with you as a worker, not as my client, but as a worker that might help you to get unstuck? I think about supervision or supervisory relationship as a relationship, which is an ongoing thing. So if I raise it with my supervisor and say, look, I'm concerned there's something that's getting you stuck, and it may be something that you need to look at in your own life. And I get a kind of response that says, stay away, it's not about me, I just need some skills and you have to help me. Then I would pursue that a bit further and say, that didn't feel like it worked so well. That conversation seems like it didn't go so well. Something about the way I was framing it or saying it seems like it didn't sit comfortably with you. Can we talk about it? And I wouldn't give up. I would go back and say, I think I'm missing something. What can I do? Because it feels like it's really important. The relationship we have is as important as the relationship you're going to have with other people. If we're struggling, then I think it's important we find a way to resolve this. What can I do to help?
I asked Banu how she knows when practitioners are feeling comfortable and confident in supervision, when they're comfortable to describe areas that they need help in, or when they might be getting stuck. How does she know this, and how does she create an environment where this knowledge can come to the fore?
It becomes important for me to not minimise what they're saying, but be curious. How did you come to this understanding? What's making you think you've messed up? And so now that you're sitting back and looking at it, what are things you need to do? Whether I'm in private supervision or in my, if I'm in an organisation, in my mind, the priority goes, duty of care is to the client first, next to the supervisee. And so I need to be the best I can be so they can make sure that they're looking after their clients. So when you say how much time or when, it's often determined by the supervisee. When they get comfortable with me, they will often very quickly go to the place of, I don't know why I made this decision, or why I don't know how I did this. I need you to help me to understand this better. When they're still in the beginning phases of wondering whether they can trust me, is it safe to share their mistakes, they will be much more focused on this is what I did, and, you know, these are the achievements and this is how things are going, and minimise often the things that they're worried about. And if that's happening all the time, then it's up to me to kind of attend to what is it that I need to do to make it safe for them to talk. You know, I reflect on my own journey of being a supervisor, and I think in my early stages, I used to weigh up and think, I can't go to my supervisor and talk about the one session that went really well, because that will seem like I've got nothing to learn. I can't talk about the one that went really bad, because then she'll think she's got a long way to go. I'll go somewhere in between. And I keep that in mind because it's a way for people to feel into the relationship and to make that decision. Is she somebody who is safe enough for me to say, I need your help, and she's not going to shame me, she's not going to blame me, and this is going to be a learning experience rather than a shaming experience.
I asked Hanna how she creates space in supervision for practitioners to describe when they might become unsure about how to progress or which direction to head. I asked her about some of the strategies which help practitioners to feel comfortable to share this with her, and how she maintained a safe and respectful work environment so that these conversations could be had.
In some ways, a clinical supervisor, centering yourself around that and being curious around those stuck moments too, just really kind of thinking about and exploring I'm just really interested to know what happened at that time, like what was happening for you, and exploring kind of the sense of how you're sitting with the frustration, because, you know, that maybe there is some frustration and maybe that's kind of, you know, that's a legitimate feeling. And then a sense like, how did that affect kind of the work, or, you know, how did you deal in that moment with that feeling kind of coming over you? What was going on for you? How was your plan to kind of work with that and deal with that and still kind of maintain your ongoing relationship with the client? What do you think Mum might have noticed during that time with you? You know, what do you think if she was here, what do you think she might say about that session? Do you think there's anything she would have noticed at that moment? And also the sense of like, what do you think, you know, for the client, what do you think they were kind of feeling too? Do you think they're feeling stuck? I'm just interested because you kind of feel a bit stuck in the work. I'm wondering what the parent might be feeling at this point in time with their issues too, in terms of, you know, their change process or where they're up to in their lives. And how do you kind of work in those moments where people have kind of relapses, or where people kind of just, you know, go back on kind of old habits? And what's your, you know, in the past, has there been any other families, clients that this has happened to, and what are some of the things that have been helpful that you might have done in that situation in terms of the things that might have worked at that point? And then the other thing might be in this was, where do you want things to go to now? So what might be your next step in terms of the ongoing work? What's, you know, next session, what's going to happen? What are some of your plans that you're going to go forward with? So having a bit of a sense of, wonder what happened in that situation for you, having a bit of a reflection on that, how did it go, and have a bit of a sense of what she might do kind of next session, bringing in her kind of vast experience from other clients and kind of similar situations.
So Julie described the important role of understanding a practitioner's own values, their own connection to these set of values and ways of working. Julie describes how in understanding these, she's able to help them approach their work with children and families in ways that help them to overcome challenges or experiences where they feel stuck.
The aim of supervision is that you do bring in some of those sticky points that maybe people are feeling not so sure about, or not so clear about which way they want to go, or that they feel like something's happened that they may need to repair or do differently in the future. That's the real kind of where the good work happens, and I think that takes some time to build up. Another thing that I often do is, if I do feel like that there's a real kind of block in that supervision process, whether it be about, you know, looking at the clients that happen to parents or in other areas, is take a different tact sometimes and look at areas where things have gone well and build up a more of a strengths-based discussion. to be able to balance that view that they're not always seen as being the clinician that doesn't have all the answers. I know I reflect on my own values, and my own kind of professional practice is informed in part by that, as well as what my role is. And I would encourage the practitioner to also reflect on that. And I suppose by doing that, I'm trying to look for opportunities where someone's own values and understanding of their role matches with when we might need to address parenting. If someone says that they really value someone's autonomy or really kind of wanting to strengthen their relationships in their work with their clients, then there's a really lovely opportunity then to bring in a bit of a client's voice in the supervision to be able to say, I'm wondering what your client, who's a parent, might be thinking, might be worried about. And if they don't know, that's fine. Wonder if that's something we can ask. And if they are worried, what might we want to do with that? If they're worried about what is happening for their child, worried about how they might want to do things differently with their child, that's a good start of a conversation. And encouraging the practitioners just to start to explore that is a really important start.
I asked Angie how she works with practitioners to uncover new ways of working so that these practitioners can continue to support new and unique outcomes and better situations for both children and families.
Yeah, because practitioners really want to be helpful. Most people are in the helping professions because they want to create better life situations or help create better life situations for people, whatever that means. So considering the intent is really important, and I guess there's some areas in supervision that are useful to explore. So there's the relational aspects of, and also what's happening for supervisees. So there may be other things that kind of trigger or that people hold with. There are other things that people hold that trigger them that sometimes they might notice in the time that they spend with their families in their work. So in terms of the immediacy, I guess we'd think about how is it that we can help slow down the process a bit for practitioners so that they're able to notice things as they go along and that they might inform their next steps. So there could be anything from how you think you might run a session, what might happen within a session to kind of give you space to do that just even inside your head, or there might be an actual break if there's a longer period of time if you've got a family. So it might go back to finding what's most important to focus on in the time together, to making sure you've got the priorities right, to checking in about whether something's changed, to asking thought-provoking questions, to moving to sharing some ideas, but just having a bit of a system in your head, checking in again, finding out how a particular thought or how something's landed with other people, and how do you end well. So how do you have a bit of a kind of system for people maybe to work within a session that might help them to slow down? How do you make sure I was spending time on where they're at? So kind of have an eye on that in the supervision as well, on where we're at. So how is it for you to be talking with me about this at the moment? How was it for you when you were in the session with the family? I think going into family work, thinking about each person and how you might attend to each person and slowing down enough and spending the time doing that to begin with, the focusing, the prioritising to begin with, is really helpful to the rest of the session because it makes sure people feel heard and you're attending to hopefully what you need to. So there's a kind of reality check that you can have along the way. And if there are kids involved or children involved, what are the developmental considerations? How might you need to adjust so that you can be including them and not forgetting them?
I asked Nick about how a curious approach to the needs of every family member can help practitioners to overcome definite or rigid beliefs or even entrenched truths about a family, creating room for multiple perspective and ensuring a non-judgmental and safe space, both for practitioners in supervision, but also for children and family in their work with practitioners.
I hope to see as a collaborative approach to supervision between supervisor and supervisee, but being kind of curious together about family members experiences and possible perspectives. And so kind of using situations within the work to imagine and be in the shoes of different family members, and remaining, for me as a supervisor, remaining curious about that, and inviting the supervisee to be curious about that as well. Not seeking a kind of a right or wrong to this, but it's kind of the process of attempting to step into the shoes of the other, of multiple different family members, and in turn kind of moving through different family members' perspectives around one kind of situation or experience or incident or context, in attempt to kind of cultivate the felt experience of multiple perspectives, that things can be experienced differently by different family members at any given point in time, that there isn't a kind of a single truth to any of this, and there's a lot of richness, and it's in that diversity, and it's important to be able to see that people are coming from different positions, in the hope and expectation that doing that kind of stepping in the shoes of in supervision better equips practitioners to be in the room with multiple people, to remain curious about what's happening for them at any given moment within a conversation, within a session, within a space, and hopefully have a model experience by which to draw on, where they can foster that and invite that same curiosity with the families that they work. Believing, I guess this is my kind of belief or philosophy, that where families can be more curious about each other's perspectives, they are better equipped to navigate the kind of inherent challenges and speed humps and obstacles that families and life kind of brings.
I asked Hanna about the place for supervision in considering the child's social and emotional well-being through all practice engagement, and how this ultimately leads to better outcomes for children and their families.
I think these are the really great moments in clinical supervision sometimes, where you want to explore the strengths of what's gone well, because often sometimes, there'll be the stuck moments that you kind of work on, but actually sometimes it's also about the strengths or the things that went really well. So, you were hesitant maybe in having that conversation, but how did you manage to do it? And how did it go? What went well? What are some of the things? And what do you think that, that mum kind of might have made of this kind of conversation? So really exploring the things that she sees as kind of things that she's done well, and actually in some ways what you're wanting to do is amplify that by having a time and space in the clinical supervision to really kind of reflect on those, coming through a stuck moment in clinical work, to kind of this sense like, oh, I did something that kind of worked. It changed something in a little way. And so that's a bit of, be a bit curious, stick with this moment, and just really have, I guess there's some joy in the kind of conversation. One of the things I really like to explore is kind of that sense of achievement in the work, but also joy in the work, that sometimes there's some really difficult parts, but sometimes you have some wins. And so that's really important to kind of work with. And I think that question of, well, what is it from this work that you would want to take forward? Like in your work going forward, what are some of the things that you might change or do differently as a result of what you've done in working with this family? Are there things you want to are there things that you might want to kind of do, some more training in? Are there some things that actually you've discovered about yourself in this that will give you confidence in working with families going forward as well? So let's take this moment and kind of really sit with and do that. And I think it's also really important to just witness that for supervisees, wow, that's amazing. That's you got through a stuck moment. For all of us, that can be a really complex part of the work that we put ourselves out there, and your ability to kind of change your tack or work in a different way, or being open up to other possibilities with this work, that's a real achievement in yourself as a kind of worker. But also then, the sense of how does this fit for your practice, and what have you discovered about yourself? Because I think it's all about kind of making it yourself. Like, I might have done something different in the moment or acted in a different way because my practice is this way, and you've discovered a way of doing this for yourself and that fits for your practice. So really kind of a sense of kind of wanting to amplify that, I reckon, with the person that's with you.
So that concludes episode 2 of our 2-part series on supervision for children's wellbeing. I have to say it's been an absolute delight to be able to work with Hanna, Banu, Julian, Nick and Angie from the Bouverie Centre, who have provided the benefit of their extreme wisdom, experience in supervision that supports the wellbeing of children and their families, but also, just as importantly, the practitioner themselves. A reminder to please access our online course, which was produced collaboratively with the Bouverie Centre and is called Supervision for Children's Wellbeing. You can access that through our website on www.emergingminds.com.au. I'm Dan Moss. Thank you all so much for your time, and we look forward to joining you again in a fortnight's time for another Emerging Minds podcast.
Visit our website at www.emergingminds.com.au to access a range of resources to assist your practice. Brought to you by the National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health, led by Emerging Minds. The National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Support for Child and Youth Mental Health Program.